My name is Lillian Fang, and the first time I realized I'd been edited out of the family photo, it wasn't a mistake. It was intentional, deliberate, cropped with the same precision you'd use to snip away weeds from an immaculate garden. I remember staring at the framed photo on the hallway table of my sister-in-law's house, taken just a week before at the annual Lunar New Year gathering. My daughter was there smiling. My late husband's parents, siblings, nieces, nephews, all frozen in joy. But not me. Someone had quite literally cut me out of the frame. You could still see the curve of my left shoulder as if I were a ghost caught by accident. "Where's Aunt Lillian?" I heard one of the children ask. "Oh," said my mother-in-law with a tight smile. We had to adjust the composition. She was standing where the energy flows. It threw off the Feng Shui. So before you sit down and listen, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to Grace's Truth. Because if you think getting erased from a photograph is harmless, wait until you find out what else they tried to erase. They say New Year is about renewal, a clean slate. But in my husband's family, it was always about reputation. How your dress looked in photos, whether you bowed to the right ancestor in the right order, which dishes you contributed, and how they stacked against the real daughters of the family. I was never one of them. I was his wife, and even after his death, that remained my only tether. After my husband Michael passed, they stopped calling as often. My presence at holidays became optional. My thoughts, like soft music at a loud party, always tuned out. That year, the year they cut me out, I wasn't even told what time the family dinner was starting. My daughter Emma had texted me nervously at noon. "Mom, you're still coming, right?" I didn't answer immediately. I was staring at a message I'd just received from my brother-in-law's wife. "We're going with a smaller group this year. Just the inner circle, you understand." Inner circle. I almost laughed. How ironic that I had to be married into this family to even orbit near it, and once Michael was gone, so was my access. Still, I arrived that night with sesame rice balls and a bottle of plum wine. A silent protest. A gesture of grace. My daughter greeted me at the door, hugged me like a secret. Inside laughter, gold paper banners, perfume, expensive smiles. I handed my coat to a maid I didn't recognize and slipped into the room like a shadow that forgot how to make noise. Patricia, my sister-in-law, saw me and said nothing. My mother-in-law tilted her head. "Lillian, you're here," like she'd found a stain on the couch. I held out the rice balls. "I used your grandmother's recipe." She took the dish like it was a dead bird. "I wasn't sure if we should expect you," she added. "It's been such a heavy year." She said it the way people say Mercury is in retrograde, as an excuse for bad behavior. After dinner, I noticed no one asked me to be in the group photo. When I stepped near, camera in hand, Patricia said, "Oh, Lillian, could you take it for us?" I did, silently. And not just because I was hurt, but because I knew it would be the last photo I'd ever take for them. 3 days later, that photo was framed and proudly displayed at the front of the house during a brunch they held for the neighbors. I wasn't invited to that either, but I saw it. Because Emma took a picture of it and sent it to me with a single text. "I'm so sorry." And when I zoomed in, I noticed it. There was a slight distortion on the left side. The kind that happens when you digitally crop a person out. They hadn't just forgotten me. They'd removed me. My fingers trembled, not out of rage, but recognition. This was how it always started in their family, with polite exclusion, followed by fabricated logic, and finally erasure with a smile. But this time, something broke, because Michael wasn't here to smooth it over, and I wasn't going to let them tidy me out of existence like a spilled drink on their silk rug. Later that night, I took out the old wooden box Michael had given me for our 10th anniversary. I hadn't opened it since the funeral. Inside were letters he wrote me over the years, neatly bound in red ribbon. I unfolded one at random. His handwriting was a balm and a bruise. "If you're reading this, I'm probably gone. But know this, Lillian, you were always more than enough, even when they made you feel otherwise. They never saw you, but I did. I always did." I folded the letter back with trembling hands. In that moment, I realized they could crop me out of photos, but not out of memory, and certainly not out of what Michael had left behind. That would be their next surprise, because tucked underneath the ribboned letters was a key to a lock I had forgotten. and a truth they never saw coming. They called me the quiet one, which was another way of saying the one we can ignore. At every family gathering, I took on the role they silently handed me: observer, server, peacekeeper. I wore neutral colors, brought food I knew would not offend, laughed only after everyone else had. I learned how to fold myself smaller in every room to give them space they never offered me. I was the woman they tolerated. When I first married Michael, they smiled. At least I thought they did. His father handed me a gold bracelet at the tea ceremony, but his grip on my wrist was tighter than necessary, and he said, "We hope you will be useful to the family." Not loved, not welcomed. Useful. It was only after the wedding that the rejections began. Soft, elegant rejections hidden inside tradition. At dinners, I was always seated between the children or near the kitchen. During Lunar New Year, they handed out red envelopes in descending order of importance, and mine was always last, the smallest, and often with no card inside. Once I asked why I wasn't in the family calendar they printed every year. Patricia had smiled sweetly. "Oh, it's just for blood relatives. You understand, right?" Michael used to say, "They're just old-fashioned. Don't take it personally." But it was personal. Every year, I watched them wrap their traditions around their hierarchy, like ribbons around a gift box, and I was always the wrapping they discarded first. And yet I stayed quiet, not because I was weak, but because I believed silence was strength. I thought, if I keep showing up with grace, eventually they'll see me. But they didn't. Not when I brought dumplings shaped exactly like Michael's grandmother used to make. Not when I cleaned up after every party while the others sipped wine and gossiped. Not even when I held Michael's mother's hand in the hospital when no one else could be bothered to visit. I was always just Michael's wife, and after he passed, I was just a memory of her. There was a moment right after his funeral that I remember with stinging clarity. We were in the ancestral hall lighting incense. Everyone was there except Emma, who was outside in the car, overwhelmed with grief. I stood beside the urn holding Michael's favorite watch in my hand, the one I planned to place in the offering tray. His father reached over, took it from me, and placed it himself without looking at me, as if I were just an extra body in the room. That day, something in me began to fracture, but I told myself to hold on. For Emma, for memory, for tradition. But now, after the photo, after the cropping, after being told I disrupted the Feng Shui, I realized I had held on long enough. They always made it sound mystical, spiritual, cosmic. But Feng Shui in that house was just another word for control. You ruin the flow of energy, they said. No. I ruined their illusion that their world was pure and complete, untainted by outsiders like me. But let me tell you something they never understood. I came from a family that had nothing, and I still knew more about loyalty and honor than any of them in their silk dresses and jade bracelets. And Michael knew it too. That's why he married me. That's why he kept something for me. That's why he left a key. The key was small gold and cold to the touch. I found it under the ribbon of letters in a velvet pouch. There was no label, no note, just the weight of purpose in my palm. I stared at it for hours that night. I tried it on every drawer in the bedroom. Nothing. The closets. Nothing. Even the lockbox under the bed where we kept passports. Nothing. And then I remembered. The old oak cabinet in his office. The one he said was just for art supplies. The one I never touched because he was territorial about it. The lock clicked, and the door creaked open like a sigh. Inside, nothing but a red lacquered box. It was the kind of box you only see in historical dramas, polished to a sheen, with golden phoenix clasps and red silk lining. It looked like it held emperor's secrets. And in a way, it did. Inside were documents. Old ones. Original copies of ownership papers. Business shares. Trust agreements. But one in particular made me sit down trembling. An amended will. Michael had signed it 6 months before he died. It granted me full control over the Fang family trust, every asset, every share, every property not already held in his parents' names. It was all legally mine, and the family didn't know. Because Michael never told them. Because he didn't trust them. Because maybe in the end he saw what I never dared to admit out loud. I sat there on the carpet of his office, the box open before me, and for the first time in years I wept. Not for sadness. but for clarity. They had spent years cutting me out of their lives, their photos, their family functions. But they had no idea that the woman they considered invisible had just inherited the center of their universe. And now that I knew, I wasn't going to use it to punish them. Not yet. No, something more powerful than punishment was rising in me. Presence. The one thing they never allowed me to have. When silence becomes your language, you learn how to make it sing. I was always quiet at their gatherings, but it wasn't out of shyness. It was the silence of strategy. Like still water hiding the depth of its current, like a storm that hasn't yet chosen its direction. And now that I had the will, Michael's will in every sense of the word, I finally understood what I was meant to do with it. But not yet. I would not storm into their house waving documents. I would not scream or accuse or demand recognition. That would be too easy for them to ignore, too easy to twist into Lillian's bitterness. No. I would let the truth hang in the air like incense smoke. Unspoken, but impossible to miss. The next morning, I met Emma for tea. She chose a tiny corner cafe with marble tabletops and potted succulents lining the windowsill. We sat by the glass, the winter sun slanting gently across her face. She looked exhausted. Her hair pulled into a loose ponytail, dark circles under her eyes. "Mom," she said gently, "I'm sorry about the photo." I stirred my oolong tea, letting the silence speak for a moment. "You didn't crop it," I said finally. "But you knew they did." Emma's shoulders sank. She bit her lip. I didn't know they were going to do that. But I knew they might. I should have said something. I looked at her. My daughter, the only bridge left between me and that family. And I realized she too had been raised in the atmosphere of don't upset the hierarchy, of smile and stay small. "You don't have to protect them anymore," I said. She looked up surprised. "But if I don't," she whispered, "who will protect you?" I reached into my bag and slid the red lacquer box across the table. Emma opened the lid and her breath caught. "What is this?" "Your father's final word." We sat there for almost an hour. She read through the documents carefully twice. She asked questions. She checked the dates, the signatures. When she finally looked up, her eyes were wide with something I hadn't seen in years. Fury. "They made you feel worthless for years," she said quietly. "And the whole time, you were holding this, huh?" "No," I replied. I wasn't holding it. I was entrusted with it. That distinction matters. Because Michael hadn't just given me power. He had given me responsibility. And whether he knew it or not, he had also given me a final, irreversible truth. They could erase me from a photograph, but not from the foundation of everything they thought they owned. I returned home that evening and lit incense at the tiny altar I kept for Michael. I had never asked him for signs, never begged for visitations. But that night I spoke. "I found it," I whispered. "Now what?" The flame on the incense wavered slightly, then stilled, and I heard my own voice answer back. Not supernatural, not ghostly, just the part of me I had forgotten existed. "Wait, watch, and remember." So I did. In the weeks that followed, I returned to the family group chat. Quietly, casually. I began replying to their passive-aggressive updates with polite nods. "Sounds lovely. Hope the renovation goes well." Emma mentioned the new car, congratulations. They didn't know how to respond. I was the ghost that had returned, but not with rattling chains, with polite presence, with impossible composure. They couldn't ignore me anymore. But they couldn't attack me either. Not without looking petty, not without breaking their carefully constructed face of family unity. Patricia even invited me to her birthday brunch. Just a few of us, she wrote, nothing formal. I said yes. At the brunch, she wore pearl earrings and a fake smile. Her husband greeted me at the door like I was a tax audit. But I came bearing a gift, a calligraphy scroll from Michael's collection, original ink, 19th century, framed in sandalwood. A piece they'd been angling to get since Michael died. I handed it to her wordlessly. She unwrapped it with greedy hands. When she saw what it was, she gasped. "Lillian, this is priceless." I smiled. "So are memories?" She blinked, confused. "Pardon?" Nothing, I said, sipping my tea. Just remembering something Michael once said about honoring the past properly. Patricia didn't know what to do with that. Good. Because I wasn't here to be understood anymore. I was here to be unforgettable. Like the absence in that photograph. Like the weight of a truth still unspoken. I had become silence made visible, and they had no idea that I was about to become something else entirely. I wasn't invited to this year's Lunar New Year dinner, not even a courtesy call, not a forwarded e-card, not a "we understand if you can't make it, but we're gathering at 6. Nothing. Just a notification. Emma texted me again. They're doing it early this year? Everyone's already there. My fingers hovered above the keyboard. I thought of saying, "Thanks for telling me." I thought of sending a red envelope emoji and pretending I cared. But instead I wrote, "I know," because I did. The moment I saw Patricia's latest post, a boomerang of wine glasses clinking under string lanterns with the caption, "Chosen family, best energy," I knew they'd gathered. Without me. Again. This time they didn't even try to hide it. And yet again the family photo appeared. New year, new setting. Same crooked smile across everyone's face. Same red and gold decorations. Same sense of suffocation under tradition pretending to be celebration. And I wasn't in it. Not just not present. Not even remembered. Until I looked closer. They hadn't just left me out this time. They had taken an older photo, one where I stood at the edge, and blurred me out. Not cropped. Not replaced. Blurred. Like a censorship filter. Like a glitch. Like I was something to be hidden. And it was Emma who confirmed it. "They edited it," she said on the phone. I recognized it. "It was taken 2 years ago at Uncle Ming's. You were standing by the koi pond. But now, you're gone." I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I felt something colder, sharper, cleaner, the kind of silence that doesn't tremble anymore. I sat at my own kitchen table that evening, alone, surrounded by candles and quiet music. My small celebration just for me. Red envelopes folded neatly beside a vase of yellow chrysanthemums. Michael's favorite dumplings steaming on the stove. The scroll he loved hanging above the door. And across from me the red lacquered box. Open. Waiting. There was something else inside I hadn't read yet. A letter sealed in gold wax. I broke the seal. It wasn't addressed to me. It was addressed to Patricia. I recognized Michael's handwriting instantly. To Patricia, "If you're reading this, it means Lillian has finally had enough of your subtle cruelty. Don't be surprised. You've been rehearsing your meanness for years. You once told me after our wedding that Lillian disrupted the family aesthetic. That she didn't fit in the photos. That she would bring bad feng shui. You said it as a joke, but the kind that tells the truth too loud. Well, here's the final edit. Lillian now holds the rights to your decorative illusion. Try cropping that." I laughed. Out loud. Not bitterly. Not with anger. But with something that tasted almost like joy. Michael had seen. He had known. He had called it out. On paper. In ink. I folded the letter and placed it back in the box. Then I opened my laptop and began writing checks. Red envelopes for the grandchildren. $10,000 each. No explanation. Just the message. From your Aunt Lillian. In case you ever feel unseen. Then I wrote one more. A check made out to Patricia. Amount. Nibaon. Zero. Memo line. For your aesthetic discomfort. I slipped it into a red envelope and addressed it by hand. No message. No return address. Only a stamp shaped like a mirror. Later that night, Emma called again. "They're talking about you," she said quietly. "Let them." Uncle Ming saying you're trying to buy everyone's affection. I smiled. Good. That means they've opened the envelopes. Emma paused. "You're really not coming tomorrow." To what? The second dinner. The one for friends and business partners. I let the silence linger. "I wasn't invited," I said. "They said they assumed you'd be too uncomfortable." I took a breath, then spoke softly. "Tell them comfort was never something I expected from this family. Just decency." And even that was apparently too much. At midnight, I lit a single firecracker on the back porch. It hissed, cracked, and sparked into 1,000 fleeting stars above the snow. I raised a glass of plum wine to the sky. To the new year, I whispered. To truth, no matter how inconvenient. And in that silence, I knew. I hadn't been erased. I'd simply stepped out of the frame. And now, they were terrified of what I looked like when I wasn't holding the camera anymore. It wasn't the photo that broke me. It was the comment under it. 3 words. 12 characters. Casually posted beneath the latest Family New Year snapshot, like it was just another emoji reaction. She ruins the feng shui. It was Patricia, of course. She hadn't tagged me, but she didn't need to. Everyone knew who she was. The only person not in the photo. The only one whose presence had become the unspoken punchline of every polite conversation. And it wasn't even a direct attack. It was worse. It was dismissal. Cruelty disguised as cleverness. Bigotry wrapped in silk. The kind of sentence you can laugh off when someone calls you out. Oh, I was just joking. Oh, don't be so sensitive. But it wasn't a joke. It was a summary. A distillation of years of subtle rejection of being treated like my energy didn't fit their aesthetic. Like I was a stain on the family photo album. Except now I was no longer just insulted. I was done. I didn't reply to the comment. I didn't message her. I didn't even screenshot it. Instead, I let the silence stretch for 2 days. Then I walked into the Fang ancestral estate without announcing myself. It was mid-morning, bright cold and too quiet. A maid opened the door. She recognized me, hesitated, then stepped aside. I didn't wait for an invitation. In the main hall, Patricia and her husband were having tea. The table was pristine gold-rimmed porcelain cups long gone and red date slices, a plate of sugar-dusted melon seeds arranged in perfect symmetry. I walked in with a folder in my hand and set it down on the table like a scalpel. Patricia blinked. Lillian. This is unexpected. Not as unexpected as your comment, I said calmly, though I shouldn't be surprised. You've always had a talent for hiding knives in compliments. Her husband cleared his throat. If you're here to cause drama— No, I interrupted. I'm here to return energy, since apparently mine's so disruptive. I opened the folder. Inside, a copy of the amended trust. Legal documents with Michael's signature. Control over the estate's assets. The gallery the family shares in the Shenzhen property, and the ancestral land development proposal they'd been quietly pushing through without notifying me. Their eyes widened. Patricia reached for the document like it might vanish. Where did you get this? From the cabinet in Michael's office. The one you told me not to bother with? Her voice sharpened. This was supposed to be sealed. I met her eyes. It was until you blurred me out of your memories. The room chilled. Even the tea went cold. I closed the folder and slid it back into my bag. I hadn't come to threaten. I hadn't even come to claim. Not yet. I just wanted them to see me. To look me in the eye and realize the person they spent decades treating like decor was the person holding the deed to their legacy. But don't worry, I said, standing. I have no intention of disrupting your feng shui. I turned to go, but paused at the threshold. One more thing, I said without looking back. You always said energy flows around intention. Just remember, so does karma. And then I left. That afternoon, I received an unexpected message. From Ming, Michael's youngest brother, the one who had once referred to me as the elegant outsider. He wrote, I didn't know Michael left that for you, but I'm glad he did. If you ever want to talk or do something with the gallery again, I'd support it. It wasn't much, but it was the first time in 20 years that anyone in that family had said something that resembled respect. And for once, I didn't feel like crying. I felt like beginning. That night, Emma came over. She walked through the door, dropped her coat, and hugged me like someone clinging to an anchor. They're panicking, she whispered into my shoulder. I said nothing. They're calling lawyers, asking questions, trying to figure out if they can undo what Dad did. I pulled back and looked her in the eyes. They can't. She nodded. I know, but Mom, they're not just angry. They're scared. They should be. Emma hesitated. Does this mean you're going to take it all from them? I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I picked up the calligraphy scroll Michael had given me our first year married. It read, Balance is not the absence of conflict, but the presence of justice. I hung it above the fireplace, then turned to Emma. No, sweet girl, I'm not taking anything from them. I smiled gently. I'm just finally accepting what was already mine. Michael died quietly, in his sleep on a Tuesday sometime between 2:00 and 4:00 am. There was no grand farewell, no final dramatic gesture, just a soft exhale and a stillness that never reversed. But hours earlier, he had looked at me with something too heavy for words. A tension behind the kindness, a confession rising in his throat like steam. He said, "There's something you should find, but only when you're ready." At the time, I thought he meant the letters, or maybe his sketchbook, or the box of old family photos he had kept hidden from his parents. But now I know he meant the will, the trust, the key, the strategy. He knew he was leaving me in a war zone of soft weapons, tradition, expectation, and carefully curated cruelty, and so he left me armor, made not of rage, but of law, of truth. I remember that night like it's stitched into my spine. We'd just returned from a family dinner, one of those tense, over-decorated evenings where conversation felt like walking barefoot on glass. Patricia had said something sharp about the gallery being a waste of property space. Michael had said nothing, but he squeezed my hand under the table. When we got home, he stayed unusually quiet. He stood by the fireplace staring at the framed photo of our wedding day, me in red, him in charcoal gray. Neither of his parents had shown up. They said it clashed with their business trip to Singapore. I had said nothing, smiled through it. But that night, Michael had whispered, "If anything ever happens to me, look in the cabinet." I didn't take it seriously then. Death still felt far away. We were only in our 40s. He exercised, atikele, took turmeric pills and drank green smoothies with flax seeds. But death doesn't check your supplements. It arrives when it wants, and when it did, it came like a whisper. In the days after the funeral, they flooded me with politeness. His mother offered to help with the estate, but brought her own lawyer. Patricia kept calling the gallery our cultural asset. His father asked if I'd thought of selling that unnecessary property so they could invest it better. I said no, again and again, until they stopped asking and started excluding. That was the shift, the one that led to silence, and silence led to blurring, and blurring led to that photo. But the seed had been planted long before that moment. Michael had planted it and left me to water it. I went to his grave the morning after delivering the legal folder to Patricia. It was cold, still, the kind of air that makes grief feel formal. I knelt, brushed away a fallen branch, and placed a red envelope on the soil. Inside, it was a note. I found it. I kept quiet. I remembered everything. Then I sat there and whispered the rest. The things I hadn't said out loud in years. Your mother still calls me the outside energy. Patricia posted that I ruined the Feng Shui, and your brother wants to liquidate the gallery. But I didn't react. I didn't scream, because I don't need noise. I need memory, and I have yours. That same day, I received a visit, not from family, from their lawyer, an older man with a silver tie and too many folders. He bowed politely, called me Mrs. Fang, and asked if we could chat. He sat in my living room and offered tea I didn't pour. Then he said, "There seems to be some confusion about your role in the Fang estate." I leaned back. No confusion at all. I have the original documents, signed, dated, notarized. He nodded. "Yes, we've seen them, but the family believes they may have been drafted under emotional duress." I smiled. "Then they'll need to prove that, in court, in front of a judge, with a sworn statement accusing their dead son of coercing his wife." He cleared his throat. "That would be complicated." "Yes, for them." He paused. "May I be frank? Please. They never expected you to fight." "I know." He stood collecting his folders. Before leaving, he said something that lingered. "They underestimated you because you never spoke. But now that you are, they don't know who they're dealing with." He left, and I exhaled, not with exhaustion, but with arrival. That evening, I lit candles in the gallery. The place had been closed for almost a year. Dust had collected, walls bare, windows veiled. But that night, it glowed again. Michael's sketches, my designs, a photograph of our wedding that included only us. It was time to let people back in, not the family, the public, the truth. The gallery was always Michael's sanctuary. He called it a quiet war against forgetting. Because art, he believed, could outlast reputation, outlast money, outlast even family. After he died, I couldn't step inside for months. Every time I passed its glass doors, I saw his ghost reflected back at me, laughing softly, holding a brush, standing exactly where I still imagined he should be. But now the gallery felt like more than memory. It felt like a message I'd been entrusted with, and I was finally ready to reply. It took me 2 weeks to clean it. Emma came every Saturday. We worked quietly, dusting rehanging frames, repainting the trim. She never asked about the trust again. I never brought it up. But I noticed how her hands lingered on Michael's works, how she stared too long at a canvas he'd painted the year she started university, two koi circling under a plum blossom tree. How she held her breath when she found a note in the back of one frame that simply read, "Keep moving even when no one notices." We didn't cry. We just kept going, until the walls were full again, until the space felt like something living. And then I made a decision. I announced the reopening of the Fang Gallery with a single post. No press release, no sponsorship, just a caption. After a year of silence, we're ready to show you what remembering looks like. Curated by Lillian Fang. Opening this Saturday. All are welcome, even those who once forgot us. I didn't tag anyone, but they saw it. Patricia commented with a single emoji. Her version of a warning, and I ignored it. The gallery opened at 10:00 By 9:30 there was already a line. Not huge, not viral, but real. Former students of Michael's, local artists, quiet neighbors who had walked past for years but never stepped inside. They came, they stood, they waited. And when the doors opened, they stepped into a space that had been reborn. I called the exhibition Unseen. Each piece was dedicated to people who had been overlooked, silenced, or erased. A woman looking out a window while her family celebrated behind her. A child sitting at the edge of a family table. An elder standing slightly out of focus in a family portrait. None of the subjects had faces, just presence. Presence that could no longer be ignored. And in the final room, a single installation. A large photo, me standing in front of the ancestral altar. No one else in the frame. Beside it, a plaque that read, "Sometimes you have to step out of the picture to see who's trying to control the frame." The response was immediate. Whispers, comments, photos snapped, shared, tagged. People asked if it was a political message. Some asked if it was about grief, about cultural tension, about inheritance. I answered all of them the same way. It's about memory. At 5:30 p.m., Patricia showed up, uninvited. She walked in wearing a cream coat, oversized sunglasses, and too much perfume. Emma noticed first. She started toward me, but I touched her arm gently. Let her walk. Patricia took in the gallery like a queen inspecting an uprising. When she saw her own image indirectly reflected in the faceless subjects, she paused. And when she reached the final room, when she saw my photo standing alone in front of the altar, her mouth opened slightly. Then she turned and walked out. Not a word. That was enough. Later that night, I found a message from her. A single sentence. "You've made your point. Just remember who your daughter still depends on." I stared at the screen, felt the familiar ache rise in my chest. Then I forwarded the message to my lawyer, with one note, "This may become useful," and deleted it from my phone, because I was no longer playing defense. That evening, I sat in the empty gallery, the lights still glowing. I turned on the last song Michael ever painted to Debussy's Clair de Lune, and I danced. Alone, between frames, between memories, between everything I had been told I was not allowed to be. And in that moment, I wasn't erased. I wasn't blurred. I wasn't disrupting anyone's energy. I was the energy. The phone rang at 3:01 a.m. I was awake, not out of insomnia but instinct. Some part of me had already anticipated that the quiet wouldn't last. That when people can't control your presence, they try to invade your peace. I let it ring once, twice, then answered. Lillian speaking. A pause. Then Patricia's voice, sharp with panic and restrained rage. "Why is there a lawyer calling about the Shenzhen development? Why are my parents suddenly being asked to verify ownership of the ancestral plot?" I could hear rustling in the background. Papers. Footsteps. Maybe her husband shouting. I stayed silent. "Lillian, don't play games." I exhaled slowly. "This isn't a game. I don't know what Michael told you or what he made you believe. He didn't make me believe anything I cut in. He left me evidence." Another pause. And then, with a brittle edge, she said, "Do you want to destroy this family?" "No," I said. "But I do want to stop pretending I was never part of it." By 9. The family group chat was alive with messages, screenshots, tax documents, claims and counterclaims. The tone had shifted from dismissal to damage control. Emma texted me, "They're saying you forged everything." I replied with a photo of the notarized documents along with Michael's signature dated months before his final hospital stay. Let them try. At noon, Emma showed up at my door holding a red box. Not the lacquered one, a newer one, smaller. "I found this in Dad's art desk," she said. It was in the drawer with his calligraphy brushes. Inside was a memory card. We plugged it into my laptop. Dozens of video clips. Michael speaking directly to the camera. Some were long reflections about art. Others were quick messages. Reminders to water the bonsai to pick up more pure tea. But one stood out. Dated 2 weeks before his final decline. He looked tired, paler, but clear. "Lillian, if they're watching this, it means they're questioning what I did. Don't let them twist it. You were always my choice. Not just my wife, but my guardian. Of our legacy, our daughter, our home, our truth. They will call it revenge. But it's just restoration. Use what I left wisely. And don't ever doubt you earned it." Emma began to cry, quietly. I just sat there, still, whole. 3 days later, a formal letter arrived at my door. From the family attorney. "In light of emerging documentation and evidence, the Fang family recognizes Mrs. Lillian Fang as the principal trustee and executor of the late Michael Fang's estate, with all privileges, rights, and authorities attached." It was over. But the war had only begun for them. That evening, Patricia showed up, uninvited again. She wore sunglasses despite the fading light and carried herself with the stiffness of someone used to control, but afraid she'd dropped it somewhere. I opened the door just enough to block her view of the inside. She tried a smile. "I think we got off on the wrong foot." "We've had 20 years of wrong feet, Patricia. That's not a misstep. That's choreography." She exhaled through her nose. "I came to ask for a compromise. Such as, you keep the gallery, we keep the land. No lawsuits. No shame." I tilted my head. "And the photo?" She blinked. "What? The one you blurred me out of? Publicly. Twice. That wasn't personal. It was symbolic. It was personal. And now it's legally inconvenient." She dropped the act. "I will not let you humiliate this family." I met her gaze. Calm. Centered. "You already did that. I'm just restoring the frame." She left with a sharp turn of her heels. No apology. No truce. And I didn't need one. Because justice doesn't always come with regret. Sometimes it just arrives in clean lines and notarized margins. That night, I wrote a new plaque for the gallery. For a new piece I planned to hang. A photo of the original family portrait. The one with the blur. Beside it, I wrote, "The ones we try to erase are often the ones who built the house." The invitation came folded in red silk. Traditional, elegant, formal, just like them. It was for the annual Lunar New Year gathering at the Fang ancestral estate. Same address, same agenda. Only this time the envelope bore my full name, Lillian Fang, and my name was printed first. Above Patricia's, above her husband's, even above Michael's father, the patriarch still clinging to invisible power. It wasn't kindness. It wasn't reconciliation. It was compliance. Because they finally understood. I wasn't knocking on their door. I owned the house. Emma was nervous the entire week leading up to it. "What are you going to wear?" she asked while we sipped jasmine tea. "A gray dress," I said. "Simple, respectful, quiet." She blinked. "Not red." "No," I replied. "They use red like armor." "I don't need armor. I have the truth." Emma leaned back and stared at me. "I don't think they've ever been afraid of anyone in their own family before." "They're not afraid of me," I said, stirring honey into my cup. "They're afraid of the mirror I've become." When I arrived at the estate, the front gate opened without delay. No questioning glance from the maid. No awkward pause from the uncle who used to pretend I didn't exist. They greeted me with forced warmth, with brittle smiles. I returned every gesture with the precision of a blade. "Happy New Year. Peace and fortune to your family." Thank you for including me. Each word dipped in honey but sharpened at the edges. And when I stepped into the main hall, I felt the pause ripple through the room. Conversations dipped. Heads turned. They weren't sure if I'd come to forgive or to dismantle. And that uncertainty was delicious. I handed out the red envelopes myself, one by one, to every child, to every niece and nephew who'd grown up barely knowing me. Each envelope bore my name in gold foil. Each one contained a generous check folded with a handwritten note. For your future, remember who saw you. I didn't watch their parents squirm. I didn't have to. The silence was loud enough. After dinner, Patricia made her move. She stood and raised a glass. To old wounds, she said, and new understandings. I tilted my head. A curious toast. Well, she continued, every family has missteps. Yes, I replied, standing to face her. But some call it culture and some call it cruelty. I suppose it depends on who's being stepped on. A few gasps. A few nervous laughs. She tried to salvage it. I think we've all learned something this year. I agree, I said. I've learned that silence is not peace. It's simply deferred justice. The room went quiet. Even Michael's father looked away. I didn't stay long after that. Tradition dictated we all kneel before the ancestral altar. But I simply bowed. Once. Deep. Solemn. True. And then I turned away. Not out of disrespect, but because I no longer needed their rituals to validate my belonging. As I stepped outside, Emma caught up to me. They're stunned, she whispered. They'll survive, I replied. She hesitated. Do you regret coming? I looked up at the moon full and glowing behind the plum trees. No, I said softly. I regret waiting so long to show them who I've always been. When we returned home, I went into Michael's old study. I opened the red lacquered box one last time. Inside, among the letters and deeds, was a sealed envelope I hadn't noticed before. My name on the front, written in his gentle, slanted script. I opened it. Inside, a single photo. Our wedding, just the two of us, framed by lanterns, smiling, whole. On the back, a single sentence. They never saw you. But I did, and now the world will too. The red envelopes were the beginning. The whispers came next. Then the resentment. By the end of the week, I heard from 3 different family members, each calling under the guise of checking in, but each conversation bending inevitably toward money. You've been very generous with the children. I just hope it's sustainable. Don't forget our parents are elderly. They've sacrificed so much. They shouldn't feel threatened. Lillian, we all want peace, but throwing money around can create imbalance. It sends a message. Yes, it did. That message was, I'm not invisible anymore. It was Patricia who pushed hardest. 3 days after the New Year dinner, she requested a meeting to discuss family structure moving forward. I met her at the ancestral estate, not because I owed her anything, but because there are some confrontations you don't have in public. She sat in the garden pavilion, still dressed like a dynasty widow, all silk and structure. I wore linen, pale blue, no jewelry, no theatrics. I brought no lawyers, no folders, just a box of red envelopes. Is that another round of donations? She asked, smiling thinly. No, I said, setting them down. These are records. She blinked. Records. I opened the envelopes one by one. Inside each, photocopies of every instance they'd forgotten me. Photos with me cropped. Calendars without my birthday. Legal forms that referred to me as spouse unlisted. Even an old seating chart from the year of the horse that labeled me Table 8. Non-essential. Patricia's face remained still, but her breath gave her away. I kept everything I said quietly, because I was never crazy. I was careful. She reached for the papers, but I pulled them back. I don't want revenge, I said. Then what do you want? I want honesty. I want you to stop pretending your cruelty was culture. And I want you to understand that power in the wrong hands becomes rot. She folded her arms. And you think you're the right hands? I smiled. No, but Michael did. And now so does the law. Later that night, I sat alone in the gallery. It was closed. Quiet. Just me and the walls. I walked past the faceless portraits, past the empty chairs, past the installation of my blurred image, and then I stopped at the newest edition, a small frame. Inside it, a scan of one of the red envelopes I had given to Emma's children. Beside it, a note. One day they will ask who she was. Let them read this first. Emma came by with the kids the next day. They ran through the gallery with the reverence of a playground, touching, pointing, whispering. They stopped at the frame. "What's that, Nai?" one asked. I knelt beside them. "It's a promise," I said. "To who?" "To you." They looked confused, but they smiled. That was enough. That night, I poured myself a glass of plum wine and took the final envelope from the red lacquered box. It was addressed to me, not as a wife, not as a daughter-in-law, but as Lillian Fang, head of house. Inside Michael's final written words, "Legacy doesn't belong to those who inherit it. It belongs to those who protect it. You don't have to fix what they broke. Just build something they can't destroy. And if one day they finally see, you don't let them call it grace. It was always justice." I looked out the window. Snow had started to fall again. Soft, quiet, certain, just like me. The thing about inheritance is, it's never just money. It's memory. It's myth. It's who gets to tell the story when everyone else is gone. And for years, I'd let them be the narrators. Let them define me in whispers. The outsider, the widow, the one who doesn't understand tradition. But now the pen was in my hand, and I wasn't going to write a tragedy. The week after New Year, I was invited to speak at a community event on women and legacy. A quiet invitation extended by a local curator who had visited the gallery and wept in front of the blurred photo installation. "I felt like you told a story. I'd been living my whole life," she said. "Would you be willing to share, not just the art, but the story behind it?" At first I hesitated. I didn't want to perform my pain. But then I remembered what Michael had written. Legacy doesn't belong to those who inherit it. It belongs to those who protect it. So I said yes. The event was held in a modest hall, folding chairs, string lights, the scent of incense, and nervous hope. I stood at the front not with notes, but with an envelope in my hands. I told them the story, not all of it, not the legal battles, not the millions, but the core, how I had been blurred out of a photo, how silence had become my language, how I'd kept records instead of rage, and how one man, my husband, had left me something more powerful than revenge, recognition. When I finished, the room was silent. Then someone clapped, then another, then everyone. It wasn't loud, but it was true. Afterward, women approached me, older women, younger ones. A woman who had been erased from her father's will because she married wrong. A daughter-in-law who'd never been in a family photo in 12 years of marriage. A woman whose family called her success accidental. They all said the same thing in different ways. I didn't know I was allowed to speak. And I told them, "You were always allowed. They just built rooms without doors." That night, I created something new. Not an installation, not a post, not a press release. A registry. I called it the Red Frame Project. A digital archive where people could upload the stories they'd been erased from. A place to restore the names missing from plaques, from photos, from holidays. A living gallery of reclamation. Within 48 hours, I had submissions from 6 countries. One read, "They took me out of the family tree because I didn't have sons. So I made my own tree." Another, "My husband's mother never used my name, just called me the girl. I wrote a book. My name is on the cover." And then quietly, I received a message from someone I never expected. "Michael's father. I saw your talk. I didn't understand before. I won't ask for forgiveness, but I want to contribute to the red frame. There's a name I erased once. It deserves to be remembered." He attached a photo, black and white. A young woman, holding a child. No caption, no frame. I recognized her. It was Michael's aunt, estranged, exiled, and never mentioned again after she refused an arranged marriage decades ago. I replied, "She'll be the first entry." And she was. They say when a bell rings, a spirit rises. But no one talks about the sound silence makes. When it finally breaks. The Red Frame Project spread faster than I ever imagined. By the end of the month, we had over 10,000 submissions. Stories of daughters erased from wills, sons ignored for being soft, widows cropped out, queer children replaced in family portraits, nannies and caretakers who raised entire households yet had no photo on the walls. Each entry became a thread in a growing tapestry of truth. And at the center of it all was a woman once called Bad Feng Shui. It wasn't just the public who took notice. Media outlets began requesting interviews. First local, then national. The gallery saw record visitors. And still I refused most appearances. Because I knew the moment I stepped into too much light, they'd try to recast me as the tragic widow, the rebellious in-law, the bitter beneficiary. So I kept the voice calm, the posture humble, the message clear. This isn't about me. It's about what they tried to erase. Then one morning, Patricia called. Not on behalf of the family, not for negotiation, but for help. Her voice was different this time. No silk, no venom. Lillian, she said quietly. It's Ming, Michael's younger brother. The one who had once called me the elegant outsider. The one who had sent me that text of support. He's sick, she said. Liver cancer. Late stage. I sat down. I'm sorry, I said, and I meant it. He asked for you. I didn't hesitate. I packed a bag and drove to the hospital an hour away. When I entered his room, he smiled weakly but sincerely. I was wondering if you'd come, he said. You asked, I replied. That's more than most of them have done in 2 decades. He chuckled softly. You always had teeth behind your kindness. Michael saw it. I was just too proud to admit it. I sat beside him. The room smelled like antiseptic and orchids. I want to be remembered, he said. Not just as a businessman, but as someone who saw the truth, even if I was late. I nodded. He reached for my hand. Put me in the frame. I did. With his blessing, we uploaded his story. The truth. How he had watched the family mistreat me knowing it was wrong. How he stayed silent to keep peace. How peace became guilt. And how guilt became legacy. He died 3 days later. His entry went viral. Not because he was a Fang, but because he said the line no one else in the family had ever dared to say out loud. I could have done more. I didn't. This is how I begin to repair. At the funeral, Patricia said nothing to me. She wore black. She cried. But she kept her distance. And I didn't approach her. Because closure doesn't always need a conversation. Sometimes it just needs distance. The day after we buried Ming, I added a new room to the gallery. Small. Quiet. Walls painted moonlight gray. At the center, a single spotlight. A blank white frame. No name. No caption. A sign on the pedestal read, reserved for the ones who never apologized. But changed anyway. That room filled faster than I ever expected. And then one day, Emma came to me. She was holding something behind her back. I found this, she said. In a folder of Dad's. It was misfiled. She handed it to me. An old photograph. From our wedding. Michael and I in the center. Emma in red holding our hands. And behind us every family member. Including Patricia. Including her husband. All of us. Together. Uncropped. I stared at it. My fingers trembling. It had never been displayed. Never framed. But it existed. And that changed everything. I placed it in the gallery. Not on the main wall. Not in the center. But in the room with the moonlight gray walls. Beneath it I wrote, even the moments they tried to forget. Still remember us. The night after placing that old wedding photo in the gallery, I stayed late to clean. But mostly I stayed because I wasn't ready to leave. Not that night. Not with the ghosts so talkative. The Red Frame project had started as an act of defiance. A response to exclusion. But now it was something else. Something larger. More tender. More sacred. It had become a sanctuary of stories. Proof that being forgotten didn't make us invisible forever. As I locked the gallery doors that night, a message lit up on my phone. From Emma. Can we talk? I'm outside. I turned around and there she was, leaning against her car. No makeup. Hair in a loose bun. Eyes tired but honest. I walked over in silence. Emma didn't speak right away. Then softly, I saw the wedding photo. The one you framed. I figured you might, I said. Why now? Because it finally felt like someone remembered me on purpose. Emma swallowed hard. You know, I never agreed with them. Not really. I know. But I didn't stop them either. I know that too. Tears filled her eyes. Does that make me like Ming? No, I said. It makes you like someone who still has time. We sat in her car for almost an hour. No lectures. No guilt games. Just stories. She told me how for years she tried to please everyone, Patricia, Michael, even the Feng Shui consultant. How it felt like walking on glass in heels that didn't fit. And how when she got married she was told that family harmony meant silence. I should have defended you, she said. Not should have I corrected. Could have, but now you can. Emma reached into her purse and pulled out a folded paper. A list. It had names, dates, and notes. These are the women I've talked to. The ones you inspired. They want to help expand the project. In different cities, different languages. I stared at the list. Dozens of names. One had even started a version in Spanish. Las olvidadas. The forgotten. And I realized then, this wasn't just a gallery anymore. It was a movement. A week later, we held our first press event. I was nervous. I hate microphones. But I wore the same red dress I had been cropped out of. This time it was centered. And when the camera light turned green, I said, they told me I ruined the Feng Shui. But what they meant was, I ruined their illusion of control. The crowd was silent, breathless. Then the applause began. More stories flooded in, and with them came offers. Book deals, TV rights, branded exhibitions. I turned most of them down, because truth doesn't need a studio contract. But one letter stood out, handwritten, from an elderly woman in Taiwan. She wrote, I've been photoshopped out of 7 family pictures, so now I print my own. In every one, I draw myself back in wearing a red dress. I wept when I read it. Then I framed it, hung it next to a self-portrait she had mailed, stick figure and all. Caption, she drew herself back in, so I never had to draw myself out. And then came the twist I didn't expect. A lawyer reached out. He represented Patricia. She's dying, he said. Pancreatic. Weeks left. I felt nothing. Not at first. Then, oddly, sadness. Not for her, but for the version of her that could have been. She asked to see you, he said. I thought about it. For days. Then finally I went. Patricia was thin, brittle, still draped in silk, but this time it clung more like surrender than armor. She didn't speak for a long time. Just stared out the hospital window. Finally, I fought you harder than I've ever fought anyone. I noticed. And you won. I shook my head. This wasn't a war. She turned to me, eyes dim but piercing. No, it was a reckoning. Patricia reached beside her bed and pulled out an envelope. Inside, a photo. It was the last Christmas Michael and I had attended. I remembered it clearly, because I'd worn gold. And because after it was taken, I'd never been invited again. I stared at it. It was intact. No one had been cut. They asked me to crop it, she said. I told them no, and I kept it. I looked up. Patricia smiled just a little. You ruined the Feng Shui, Lillian, but you saved the family's soul. Then she closed her eyes and slept. Patricia passed away 3 days later. The funeral was tasteful, expensive, and empty in the ways that mattered. No whispered secrets, no lingering hugs, just an orchestra of cold sympathy and untouched cucumber sandwiches. I didn't stay long. I wasn't there for her. I was there for Emma. She stood beside the casket, mascara steady this time, hand on my shoulder as we watched people filter past. She asked for you in her final hours, Emma said. I know, I replied. She gave me something before she died. You mean the photo? I nodded. She kept it. Emma's voice cracked. She did. And now it's ours. Later that week, I had it professionally scanned and restored. It would become the final image in the exhibit. Not because it was perfect, but because it was true. The Red Frame project went global in the months that followed. What began as one woman's quiet resistance to erasure had turned into a symphony of voices. We were in museums, schools, retirement homes. Some frames held old women with fire in their eyes. Others showed daughters reclaiming grandmothers, sisters, aunts who had been cut away. One girl sent in a birthday photo where her mom had been digitally replaced by a plant. She wrote, "Thanks to your story, I printed the real version and framed it for my bedroom. I wanted to wake up every day and remember who planted me." That letter sits on my desk to this day. With every new submission, I noticed something. It wasn't just older women being erased anymore. It was disabled relatives, gay uncles, divorced cousins, sons who wore makeup, daughters who married outside the culture. The lie was always the same. We're doing this for harmony, for tradition, for Feng Shui. But tradition misused becomes a weapon, and silence worn too long becomes a grave. I was invited to speak at a conference on cultural memory in Singapore. I almost said no. Then I remembered what Patricia had said on her deathbed. You saved the family's soul. Maybe it wasn't just my family. Maybe there were more souls waiting. At the conference, I told my story, start to almost finish, from the New Year photo to the red frame project. And then I said this: erasure is a slow violence. It doesn't scream, it whispers. You're not worth remembering, but we are, and we always were. A standing ovation followed, not because I was eloquent, but because they had lived it too. On the flight home, I stared out the window and thought of Robert. He used to say, memory isn't just about what we remember, it's about who we choose to remember. He would have loved this. He would have framed every photo himself, even the awkward ones, especially those. Back in the gallery, I added a new section. It was called The Ones Who Drew Themselves Back In. No names, just images, some drawn, some photoshopped, some collages made of receipts, letters, fingerprints, each one a declaration. I was here, and I mattered. And then, one afternoon, a young woman walked in, late 20s, nervous energy. She looked around, lingered by the restored Christmas photo, and turned to me. You're Lillian, right? Yes. My name's Clara. I think we're related. I blinked. She pulled out an envelope. Inside was a letter from Patricia. She had another granddaughter, born from an affair Michael had before his marriage. Patricia had found out late in life and decided to make things right. She left me this, said you'd know what to do. I read the letter. Short, blunt, apologetic in its own way. She asked me to find you, Clara said. And she asked me to ask if I could be part of the project. I smiled. Clara, you are the project. That weekend, Clara and I picked out a frame. Not red this time. Gold? She chose it. Said it reminded her of hope. The photo she brought. A selfie in front of Patricia's gravestone. The caption she wrote. She erased me in life, but gave me back my name in death. As I hung the frame, I realized something. This wasn't a revenge story. It was a reclamation. Of space. Of memory. Of names. And maybe of peace. The night before the new exhibit opened, I stood in the gallery alone. Every frame hung with purpose, some straightened a dozen times, some intentionally askew, because that's how they were found in someone's basement or attic, dusty but defiant. And then there was the gold one, Clara's frame. It shimmered under soft light like an answered prayer. This wasn't just an art show, it was a reckoning. The opening crowd was bigger than I expected. Journalists, activists, teenagers with iPhones, elders in wheelchairs. A group of young queer kids from Taipei wore shirts that said, "You ruined the Feng Shui and we love you for it." I cried in the break room. Good tears. Hot, grateful, necessary. Halfway through the night, Emma walked in. She was glowing, not like a bride or a daughter under pressure, but like a woman who had chosen her place in the world. She kissed my cheek and whispered, "You did it." No, I said. We did. We took a photo together in front of the gold frame. Clara joined us. Then someone handed me a microphone. I didn't plan to speak, but stories have their own gravity. I said, "My name is Lillian Wu, and once upon a time someone said I ruined the Feng Shui because I was old, or loud, or complicated, or too much." I believed them. I faded into photos I was never in. I poured tea. I folded napkins. I smiled politely from the margins. But silence is not balance. It's absence. And absence doesn't keep peace, it just hides wounds. So I stopped being polite. I redrew myself, and others followed. Look around you. These aren't just frames. They're battle scars. They're declarations. They're the spaces where the erased reappeared. Let the Feng Shui crack. Let the harmony shatter. If it means someone finally gets to exist in full color, we were never the problem. Just the proof that you could be more than your shame. There was silence. Then, thunder. Claps. Cheers. Laughter through tears. Even the journalist from Hong Kong wiped his eyes and whispered to his cameraman, This is what memory should look like. The next morning, I sat in my kitchen robe, loosely tied, holding Robert's old mug. I looked at the new photo on my fridge, me, Emma, and Clara, 3 generations that almost never met. Underneath, in my handwriting, they tried to cut me out, so I built a frame big enough for all of us. Clara texted later that day. She wanted to know if she could lead a chapter of the Red Frame project at her university. I don't want anyone else to wait 20 years to feel seen, she wrote. My reply was simple. Make it redder, louder, braver. 2 months later, we got the invitation. The United Nations. A cultural symposium on restorative memory. I almost said no, but Emma said, "You built a movement from shame. Don't let the world forget how." So I packed my best navy suit. And the earrings Patricia had left in her will. She'd labeled them for Lillian if she ever forgives me. I still hadn't, but I wore them anyway. Not for her. For the truth of what they represented. That even the ones who hurt you may one day give you back your voice. My speech was short, but when I was done, the moderator asked, "Lillian, what advice would you give someone who feels like they've been cut out of their own story?" I smiled. Start drawing. My name is Lillian Wu, and once I was erased from a family photo cut out for ruining the Feng Shui. That erasure became a turning point. What started as pain evolved into power. Through the quiet of grief and the storm of awakening, I created the Red Frame Project, a living archive of those removed, silenced, or rewritten by families clinging to harmony over honesty. I reclaimed my own image and helped others do the same. From Patricia's reluctant redemption to Emma's transformation, from discovering Clara to confronting the cultural silence that had haunted us all, this journey was never just mine. It belonged to every person who had been cropped out, replaced, or forgotten in the name of appearances. We reframed what it meant to belong, and we gave voice to the unphotographed lives. This was not a story of revenge. It was a story of return. Of drawing yourself back in when others decide you don't belong. Of remembering that shame only works if you stay silent. So if you've ever been erased by family, by fear, by tradition, remember this. You can still pick up the pen and sketch yourself back into the frame, one red line at a time. Follow Grace's truth to hear the whispers of the next characters every single day.